Hello and welcome to the brand new Gridiron Show, or the Gridiron Show reboot, I guess, back for the 2020 season. It's already a bizarre season for everyone involved, as we know, and we are changing things around here as well. It's a new group, there are new features, it's a new format, there is new days that we're going to be on. So we're going to get into it. It's going to be fast-paced. It's going to be a lot of fun, I promise, as well, featuring some of the faces and names that you know already and some that you don't. Well, let's start off with the usual. I'm Will Gavin. Simon Clancy is with us. Simon, how are you, buddy?
Very well, Will. How are you?
Yeah, overly warm, and after all the technical glitches of getting this thing going, just relieved that we're actually here and making this happen and embarrassing ourselves in front of our new friend.
All the royal family and serial killer chat has been put to rest. We can get on with the real business.
We're 30 seconds into the podcast. Right, good. Matthew Sherry, editor of Gridiron, is with us as well. Hello, Matthew.
Hey, well, I'm very good. Just to preempt what you're going to ask me, I think that I'm very good. Oh, there it is.
Oh, my God.
And
the fact that you've done that without me prompting you.
Kalyn, Matt's got a book coming out next week, Kalyn.
Oh, wow.
There'll be about 70,000 references just today.
He's got to market it.
I'm surprised there's not a massive pile of books, but with that lampshade, it's replaced by a massive pile of books.
It was only when I saw that it was a portrait frame that I realised it wasn't worth it. I was thinking about just coming on with the book over my face, but September 17th, people.
So that's out next week. And our new friend, you'll know from Bleacher Report, formerly from SI. We've spoken to her a few times before at games, and we're absolutely delighted to welcome Kalyn Kahler to the Gridiron Show as a regular. Kalyn, how are you? How has been the first 10 minutes of talking to three Englishmen who like to think they know what they think they know about the sport that you cover properly?
It's great. I'm really excited to join you guys because I love football, obviously, but I also really love England. So I'm trying to make it really big in England so I can leave America because it's just going to shit over here quickly. So,
we are definitely the people to make that dream happen, I promise.
I'm going to build a big fan base over here with this podcast.
I don't know how much you know about our current situation, Kalyn, but it's not much better over here, I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
And if things go a certain way in November, I'll happily swap with you.
It's out of the frying pan into the other frying pan if you were to come over here.
We do have myself and Simon an over-under about week 6 at the point at which Kalyn is going to understand what Matthew Sherry is actually saying at all times. But we're going to do our best to translate and keep things going. So today's show, the season's just a few days away. So we're going to be just focusing on the beginning of the season, picking some of the key stories that we really like and we really want to focus on going into the year. Just a reminder, the Gridiron's Pick Challenge is back. Head to the website play section where you can make your selections for the first week of the 2020 season. As always, there's weekly prizes up for grabs for the player that predicts the most correct results each week. And make sure you tell your mates to join you for the fun. You can get involved. You can put leagues up there. You can see how you're doing overall against all of us as well. So gridiron-magazine.com and find the Picks Challenge there. It's kind of contractually obliged to start off by talking about two stories which aren't really football related, but are going to be have a massive impact both on the football and on the way it's covered over the first few months. And that's obviously the impact of COVID and the Black Lives Matter movement, protests in the league and what's kind of happened there. We haven't done a show now in 3 or 4 months. And so it's a very different position to where we were around the draft, particularly from what we've seen from the league. Reacting to the player videos, apologising for not reacting earlier, and now seemingly most teams going to be allowing players to protest. I guess we go to Kalyn because, Kalyn, you're there. You've been seeing it play out in front of you. Just how big a story is this going into week 1 out stateside?
It's major. I think what the NBA players did a couple weeks ago with sitting out of the playoff games was huge. And I think that's really caused a lot of NFL players to think about what they can do this season and how they can use their platform as entertaining this country during this time and what they can do with it. And I'm trying to figure out, I don't expect to see any NFL players sit out of any games just because they're not in the playoffs yet. Like, they haven't even started a season. So we saw practices get canceled when the NBA players were sitting out of playoff games. You saw NFL teams like the Lions, they kicked it off. They canceled a training camp practice, which actually means a lot in this environment where we had so few practices this season. So that was a big statement, I thought. And they came out of the building with signs, and they spoke to the media about, how appalled they were with the shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha. So I think there is definitely going to be a potential to see something happen. And I was actually just texting with a Texans player, because obviously Texans Chiefs is our first matchup. So there's a little bit, I would imagine, for the players on those teams, there's a little bit of pressure. They're the first teams to kick it off. What are they going to do to sort of set the bar for how NFL players are going to bring attention to this cause? So I was just texting with a Texans player, and he said, whatever they decide, they're going to keep it in-house. And he mentioned, like, they were talking with the Chiefs. So he said the Chiefs, we're going to keep it in-house with the Chiefs. So I don't know if those discussions have already began between the two teams. I'm not sure what that's like between those two teams, but it seems like we're going to see something that's unified. And I don't know exactly what they're going to be doing, but I don't expect to see anybody sit from games. I think that's just a little bit, I think a lot of NFL players are probably more of the mindset of, well, we can do more if we're out there on the field, wearing the names of victims of police violence on our helmets, because they have the option to do that this year. There's going to be, in the end zones, it's going to be painted, stop hate, and I think end racism, or two phrases kind of similar to that. So it's going to be really visible on the broadcast. And the broadcasters are also going to be talking about different stories of victims of police violence. So there's definitely going to be this attention put on this, even if the players don't kneel or do anything. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see where it goes. And I think the biggest question that I have is, how are owners going to really join in on this? There have only been a handful of teams. I think of the Vikings. They put out a big statement today of like a list of 5 different things, initiatives that they were doing, very specific things: voter education, Black history curriculum in high schools that they were paying for and helping to promote. Their owners have been really taking a ton of initiative here. So I think the question is, what are the owners going to do? And are they going to do enough that the players are satisfied and feel supported? And I think that's the question that will kind of hinge on what we see the rest of the season.
I think kind of similarly, we saw what happened with Baltimore. Baltimore put that big tweet out saying, all the things that they wanted to see, and very specific actions as well, referencing certain laws and things that they wanted to see their, local government, their local representatives do. But that's still an ownership who, when John Harbaugh wanted to sign Colin Kaepernick, there were roadblocks there to him doing so. So it just shows really how that's developed. And I think, for me, the really eye-opening thing from recent weeks, from the more limited coverage we get here, was Hard Knocks, which is a series which you could argue about the relevancy of where it is nowadays. But if there was a time where we got a proper view into something important that was happening around an NFL team, I thought the stuff that we saw around the Chargers and their camp and Sean McVay, but even then, we didn't see anything from the owners, and that is the big question mark for me.
Yeah, what interests me is whether... I thought that the statement that the league put out after the players released the video that they released was arguably the most. It wasn't the most powerful thing, because the players' original statement was, but it was powerful from the sense that it was the first time that the league office themselves were taking a view of it that wasn't, we're desperately trying to get out of the firing line here and try and do some things that are positive from a PR sense, but also appease kind of the political situation. So to me, I'm just fascinated to see what it looks like this season for that reason, because it feels like what that actually did was, the players already had the platform, but it gives the players the rights to use that platform. It's very difficult now for Jerry Jones to have some of the views that he had on whether players had to stand for the anthem and everything like that, because the NFL has essentially given them backing to do what they want to do with it. And it's going to be fascinating to see how that looks.
Well, look, we're going to... Oh, sorry. So, I mean, you are very quiet comparatively.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say that I think the Texans thing is really interesting, because obviously Kenny Stills has kind of led the way, along with, Michael Thomas and Albert Wilson with the Dolphins, in terms of, Kenny was obviously arrested recently for protesting on I think it was the Louisville governor's lawn over the death of Breonna Taylor. And I mean, I'm quite angry about this in a way, and I say this as a position as a white middle class person who's benefited from white privilege throughout my life. So, but when you've seen all these things happen, I kind of think what's changed in 3.5 years that makes you see what's happening now that you couldn't see 3.5 years ago. That's the thing that really angers me, and I saw the very powerful video of Kevin Byard and Ryan Tannehill standing next to each other, and Byard reading out how the Texans felt, and then passing it over to Ryan, and Ryan doing the same and getting very choked up. And I thought to myself, you were there when Albert Wilson, Michael Thomas, Kenny Stills were kneeling, and apart from more deaths, nothing. There was still Alton Sterling, there was still Trayvon Martin, there was still all these huge number of deaths of black people at the hands of the police. And I just found it quite hypocritical. And I hope that it doesn't become tokenistic. I suppose that's the one thing I really, really hope for. And I suppose what will help the movement, in inverted commas, is the fact that there are no crowds. There's nobody there to boo when it happens. And I'm also, I suppose, intrigued by what happens on Saturday with Clemson, certainly with Trevor Lawrence had been at the forefront of everything, along with maybe Marvin Wilson at Florida State and some of the guys out of the Pac-12. Just what will happen, at Clemson, and whether or not, because what you really want to see is a very important, very powerful white player doing the things that weren't happening 3.5 years ago. And I'm sure that will happen across the league and probably across college football as well. I just hope it doesn't become a tokenistic thing that everybody feels like they have to jump on, to use the word bandwagon, but you know what I mean, given everything that's suddenly come into focus that was actually there 3.5 years ago.
Look, it's going to be a topic that obviously we will see what happens this weekend and get into further. And similarly, I mean, with COVID, I don't think there's a huge amount for us to say. I think people have seen everything that's happening, have seen that actually right now it's had quite a minor impact on the NFL and where they are in this moment. But seeing what happens once they start traveling across country and playing and all the potential impacts going forward and how roster changes are going to happen, we're just going to have to follow that and see what comes. So instead, let's talk about some football. We're not going to be able to cover off all 32 teams in kind of 45 minutes or so, although we will do our best to do a little quick fire round robin later on. So there's a few teams we want to start off by focusing on, a few teams that are in the zeitgeist in this moment going into week one. And Matthew Sherry said we had to start with Tampa Bay. I couldn't possibly say why for regular listeners, not anything to do with a Tom Brady link or anything to do with that, but they are.
Kalyn, Matthew is a Patriots fan who's more excited about Tom Brady playing in Tampa than he is about his own team season. And we're just going to put that there. Week one, we'll just lay that out.
Yeah, it's totally understandable.
Just so you know.
I mean, I mean, the reality is, you take COVID away, and it is the biggest sports story in the US for how many years, Kalyn? I mean, it's insane that we're going to see him in a different jersey. And we put the cover of the magazine. We got the cover of the magazine designed 10 days ago, and it was the first time I looked at it and thought, I'm not really sure I'm okay with this. This isn't right. But I think what interests me the most actually isn't Brady in this. I think Bruce Arians is close to being the most underrated coach in the NFL. He's won 2 Coach of the Year awards. He waited probably at least a decade too long to finally get an opportunity. And I thought he coached his butt off again last year. I thought he did a great job. I mean, the Buccaneers were Jameis Winston not being Jameis Winston away from winning 10 games last season, and that's with an incredibly young defense. I love his whole coaching staff, actually. I think they've got one of the best defensive coordinators in the league as well. And I know everybody gets fixated on his fit in Brady's fit in this offense, but it'll just work. I mean, Peyton Manning never threw the ball downfield, even in his prime, and he worked pretty well with Bruce Arians for a number of years. So to me, it's just a fascinating story. It's the best weapons he's had. Everybody says since 2007, but that forgets that when they had Gronkowski and Hernandez, they had the best weapons in the NFL, albeit 2 tight ends. But yeah, ultimately, I'm just fascinated by it. I really think it'll work. I've seen New England's offense look maybe not as bad as it did last year, but certainly bad comparatively to what history remembers in other seasons where it wasn't in sync, because there's a reason that New England run that offense, and it's it's because that when you get it right, it's virtually impossible to defend because it has an answer for absolutely everything with the option routes and everything else. There is also a reason that every other team in the league doesn't deploy it, and that's because it has to run to perfection and it needs a certain level of quarterback to operate like that. So when it's bad, it looks really bad. And I still think the majority of Tom Brady's bad season last year was a perfect storm of receivers that were too young and didn't understand the system, and the general malaise that it's set in for the last 2 or 3 years. So he looks refreshed, and yeah, I mean, I'm both upset to a degree, but also very excited to see him on Sunday.
I think the thing as well is that people will wonder whether we're overblowing his particular effect. And there's a great piece from a former colleague of yours, Kalyn, and Peter King, talking about what he saw from Tom Brady at training camp and the way he saw him training up OJ Howard and the coaching on the field. I mean, he's got an OC who was drafted 3 years after him and 6 rounds higher than him. So, which is just bizarre in itself. But
so funny.
It's the effect that he can have on players as well. I look at like someone like Leonard Fournette, who's gone there, who feels like he took his foot off the gas in a massive way in the last 2 years in Jacksonville. And you think about someone like the Garrett Blount, who they're not like for like, but the difference when he's at the Patriots and is the most sensible, hardworking, just goes out and does his job player versus who he was when he went to Pittsburgh and immediately gets, in all sorts of trouble. And you just wonder if guys that are turning up there are going to be better because Tom Brady's there, and how much that's a Belichick effect. And it's a great story. Like, it is a great story.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, like Jameis Winston threw 30 interceptions last season, and they still won 7 games, which is, I mean, it's incredible when you think of that. And so I think that speaks to Matt's point about Bruce Arians being a great head coach and figuring that out. And I think their defense, also not to shift the conversation from Tom Brady here, but their
How dare you?
How dare
you?
Their defense last season really struggled until week 11, basically. Like, they were not good. The secondary gave up so many yards. They were the 3rd worst passing defense in the league. I think this season they're going to take a step forward. They drafted Antoine Winfield Jr., who was one of the best safety prospects in this draft, but he was somehow available in the 2nd round because of, I think, injury concern with him. So I think the defense, if they can, improve on the momentum that they started getting at the end of last season, I think it's going to be enough for the Bucs to really challenge. I think they could win the NFC South. Peter picked them for the Super Bowl, and I thought that was a little aggressive, but it's a really fun pick because the Super Bowl's in Tampa Bay, and we keep, as the media, we keep rooting for these home teams to make it to the Super Bowl in their hometown, and it would be really cool to see that. So I do think the sky is the limit if the defense can hold their own and really improve off of what they started to catch on to at the end of last season.
Don't worry, Matthew will also be picking them.
Yeah.
I absolutely am. I've never been more confident.
Oh my God. I want to throw a bit of a spanner in the works. And Kalyn mentioned the defense, and I think the front seven, there are big players there. You look at the emergence of Vita Vea. You look at, obviously, Levonta David, one of the most underrated players in the league. The secondary does concern me. And I think, Antoine Winfield's had a great camp and been everything that you thought he'd be when you saw him at Minnesota. But one of those cornerbacks, those, Jamel Dean, Sean Murphy-Bunting, Carlton Davis, Pernell Motley, the undrafted free agent from Oklahoma, who's had a really good camp apparently. One of those guys has really got to step up, and because that does concern me. I really like Murphy Bunting, and I think he could be a really good player. But they've got to, that's now got to move from being good on paper to being good on the field. And the other side as well is the offensive line. The interior of that offensive line I really like. And again, you talk about underrated players. Ali Marpet is a tremendous player. Mm-hmm. Ryan Jensen, obviously the center they got from Baltimore. Good players, solid players. The tackles concern me. And I know, speaking to somebody at the Buccaneers the other day, said that, it took Tristan Wirfs a while to get his feet under him. And that's not a surprise given the shortage of the offseason. But it is a concern when you're protecting a 43-year-old quarterback. And Donovan Smith at left tackle, again, you wouldn't put him in that upper echelon, that upper bracket of left tackles in the league. So for me, there are concerns. I know it's really exciting to talk about the receivers and that front seven talent on defense, and that, the roster of tight ends they've got. But, they are not a flawless team by any stretch of the imagination.
I think the tight ends are important on that, though. You know, that ability to they could have 3 tight end sets and pass out of that. I mean, that gives them the extra protection. You know, Cameron Bray as your 3rd tight end is insane. He would be a number 1 tight end for 10, 12 teams in the NFL. I mean, I think there's a lot of talent to get excited about.
49ers apparently going for 4 tight end sets, by the way, but we'll get into that in a little while, because on the flip side of the coin, let's talk about New England as one of the other big buzz teams going into the year, not for the same reasons that they often are, but because there's so many question marks. No team suffered more from people withdrawing from the season and opting out because of COVID, and big name players as well. Guys like Dante Hightower, who are absolutely huge to what they do on that side of the ball, combined with the losses on the offensive side. But then we get the Cam Newton story. So it could be, you know, is it a case of the formerly rich getting richer again? Are we really concerned about the talent that they've got there? And do we think the coaching is enough to kind of carry that off? Kalyn, maybe it's a case of, like we see from the Patriots every year, an improvement gradually as we go along.
Yeah, not to get ahead of myself, but my coach of the year pick is Bill Belichick. I think it's the only answer. I think it's literally the only answer this season, because I don't see a situation where they're not going to be successful. I mean, I have so much faith in his coaching, and I think Cam Newton is just the greatest value that you could get for a quarterback right now for them. And by all reports, it's going really well for him. So I think they may start off a little bit slow, but I don't really have any concerns for the Patriots, even though, as you mentioned, so many of their key players did choose to opt out, which was really interesting, and makes you wonder, like, did they just have enough winning that they didn't need to prioritize it in the same way as everybody else did? But yeah, I'm not concerned. I think Belichick will design an offense that really works for Cam, and I think people had questions about how Bill and Cam were going to mesh, because Bill would coach Tom Brady so hard and people weren't sure, is that going to work for Cam Newton? I think Bill is able to adapt to the player. I think he can adapt his coaching to the player. And Peter actually wrote this in his column. He kind of singled out things that Bill Belichick had said about Cam Newton, and they were all like very positive things. And he kind of theorized, I think he's doing this because he knows how Cam operates and he knows how to get the best out of him. And that is by, saying really good things about him in public to sort of show that you have trust in him, you have faith in him. He's your guy. So I think it's going to work. And I'm really excited. It's one of the teams I'm most excited to watch this season.
Simon, I'm going to come to you because I don't want to go to Matthew.
Yeah, exactly.
God knows why would you? I hate to be the harbinger of doom about everything, but, I and coaching obviously matters, and Belichick has proved it year after year. I would have significant concerns about things. The secondary is great, but I would have significant concerns about the receiving core, for example. I think on Sunday against the Dolphins, Rex Burkhead and James White are going to catch an awful lot of passes because, apart from Julian Edelman, I would suspect either Byron Jones or Xavier Howard will try and take Edelman out, or will just follow him around and take him out of the game. So, then you're relying on N'Keal Harry and Jacoby Myers and those guys, and Damiere Byrd. For me, I know, and Matthew will be able to eulogize more, but I know they've had significant problems trying to stop the run during camp. Bo Allen has obviously gone to injured reserve. Lawrence Guy, really the only returning player of note in there, losing Malcolm Brown and losing Danny Shelton and stuff. So that would be an issue for me, and obviously not having Hightower in at the second level. I think that they are just such a fascinating watch. It's great to see David Andrews back. I think Marcus Cannon, the right tackle, opting out is a big issue. So it'll be interesting to see. Matt, would you say Yodny Kajust will slide in there at right tackle? It's going
to be Britain's finest, Jermaine Illumino.
He literally muted himself there because he knew he couldn't hold his tongue. That's what just happened.
I think Si pointing out the run defense is right. I think that's probably actually the biggest concern. Danny Shelton went to Detroit, and it wasn't like he was a world beater, but just that space eater inside. I mean, Lawrence Guy is one of the most underrated players in the league, but it's kind of who you put alongside him. Adam Butler, who is kind of the third down rusher inside, is undersized. So I think that is a concern. But ultimately, I agree with Kalyn. I mean, the coach of the year thing is interesting. I've always joked that when Bill Belichick retires, it's probably the award they'll name after him, but they never give him it because he's so much better than everybody else. He can't win it in most years, and that has been the reality. I think he's only won it twice. I think there's a good chance he does win it this year. the reality is that we can point out flaws in the team, and I think Si's pointed out the two biggest. I can also point out that if the right tackle situation, which is an if, is good, then they've probably got one of the best 5 offensive lines in the league, and they've got the best secondary in the league. And I would say that that mix is what propelled them to the Super Bowl win 2 years ago. It's still there. I think Cam will work. But ultimately, I think that you can ignore that there has never been a greater gap, and I love Andy Reid to bits, between the best head coach in the NFL and the second best head coach in the NFL, as there has been in the last decade, and it really hasn't disappeared. So I think while Belichick's still there, I would expect them to figure it out, and I think they'll be in the playoffs one way or another.
They'll miss the playoffs, was what Simon said there, just in case anyone missed it.
I will stand by
that until that's the hill I'm prepared to die on this season.
It's fine. I'm going to pick Brian Flores as my coach of the year for when he beats out the Patriots to get to the playoffs. Simon is a Dolphins fan, if you didn't know, Kalyn. Let's talk about last year's Super Bowl teams as two of our other kind of 5 or 6 teams we want to talk about. Kansas City returning 18 of 22 starters from the defense and the offensive side of the ball, seemingly in positions where they are losing players as well, like Damian Williams opting out for the year. They've got Clyde Edward-Helaire, who I know Simon is very high on as our kind of college expert at Gridiron, and people are very excited on from a fantasy perspective. And it's unsurprising considering a year where COVID is going to ravage the amount of practice time you get, the amount of film room time you get together in the same building, that people are picking this team to go there again because you've got consistency and you've got a head coach who now has done it, but also had a lot of wins before that. So anyone who picks Kansas City to go to the Super Bowl again, no one's going to call them crazy.
I mean, the question is whether they're the next dynasty, isn't it? You know, you feel like Andy Reid getting over that hump is important. Mahomes winning so early is huge. It would have been interesting to see how damaging it might have been for Mahomes had he not completed that crazy play on 4th down. So I think that's what everybody's looking at. But then naturally, you know, we've seen it before. Every piece I've written after every Super Bowl I've covered, particularly when it's not been New England have won, has been, oh, well, if you look at the pieces on this team, this could be a dynasty. It was the Eagles. It never materialised. It was the Seahawks. That was the one that could have, were it not for one play, I think. But it's a chance. There's a chance for you see the pieces in place. It does remind you of Bill Walsh and Montana and that kind of thing. And I think if Andy Reid coaches long enough, it could happen. But yeah, I think there's that natural thing the year after. It's very difficult the year after when you've won it or when you've lost in it, actually, to kind of get back to that level. So it'll be interesting to see whether they can.
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot to say about the Chiefs. I mean, as you mentioned, so many of their starters returned, Will, and I think the main difference is running back. I think they're going to get more production out of that position this year with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who is making a lot of noise as a rookie, having a great camp for them, and I think he'll be able to produce more than their running back position did last season, because we didn't really see a lot from that until late in the season from Damian Williams when he came on. So I think they're going to be a lot better at running back, and otherwise I totally think they have dynasty potential, and it's easy to say that. We'll see what happens, but they would definitely be my Super Bowl pick again, because I just think they're in such a good place with such a young quarterback and so many of the same players coming back, same coaching staff. I think they're really going to be able to challenge for a Super Bowl again this season.
So Simon, let me...
Kelly mentioned it there.
About 20 of 21 coaches returning. I think that's hugely important and so sort of undervalued in terms of the ability to be able to repeat. Again, I'd have concerns about the secondary, significant concerns. But I think they're just so well set up offensively. They're so well coached. They're such a smart team. Mahomes is such a smart quarterback, and they've kind of been there and done it. I just think that will just stand them in so much good stead moving forwards.
Yeah, what will terrify the rest of the AFC is that they won it last year and the rest of the league without playing very well for a decent portion of the season. I mean, Mahomes was injured and then didn't play that well in the second half of the season, comparatively to his own standards. And then the way that they turned it on in those playoff games when they needed to, was terrifying for the rest of the league.
Started all of those games slow. It's the only quarterback to have 3 double-digit comebacks in the same playoffs. And that is terrifying, to be in the Super Bowl and be down like you were against a pass rush, which is getting to you constantly. I'm not going to get upset, Matthew. It was really unbelievable to see, and doing it. Obviously, the Texans fell apart. You can't really. I think we could have probably put together a comeback against the Texans after the first quarter, but. I still.
They have a nasty road schedule.
I mean, they go on the road at Baltimore, Buffalo on a short week, Tampa on the road, New Orleans on the road. So it's not an easy path at all. And I think that they'll face challenges even from within their own division. But like I said, and like the guy said, I think they're just I think Brashad Breeland being suspended for 4 weeks is big. Because they're relying on a lot of young corners, and really they only get Ward is the only returning starter and certainly a cornerback, and they're relying on a lot of young guys, either undrafted free agents or late round draft picks. So I think teams will challenge them vertically early on, but I think they're set up to repeat.
So only 2 losing Super Bowl teams have ever gone back and won it the following year. We were there for one of them with New England when they beat the Rams. And I'm sure Simon will remember who the other one is if we pushed him hard enough. So why shouldn't I believe that the San Francisco 49ers can do the same, everyone?
I mean, that history tells you why, ultimately. It's very, very difficult. I didn't think enough was made of New England managing to do it. Obviously, I'm going to say that, but it really was significant as an achievement. I mean, you mentioned, they were the first team to do it since what Will's referencing 72 when the Dolphins lost to Dallas and then
don't try and make up for it
the next year. But it's very, very difficult. I mean, the way if history tells you 55 Super Bowls, only 2 have done it. So it is difficult. I mean, the team who we all feel bad for in this is the Buffalo Bills, who managed to keep getting back there, but managed to lose. I just think history tells you it's extremely difficult to do, but recent history tells you it can be done. Is that good for you?
How they'll react, though, Kalyn, I think that's the really important thing. You look at what happened with the Falcons being up 28-3 on the Patriots, being ahead by 9 late and, midway through the fourth quarter of a Super Bowl that we're pretty much in control of. Then Garoppolo with that overthrow, down the field when he had whatever his name is.
Manny Sanders over the top,
Sanders
but also, more importantly, someone open for a first down, the throw that a good quarterback takes.
I mean, I don't know what you think, but I just think that hangover from what happened doesn't take a few weeks to get over. That can, as the Falcons proved, that can last a long time.
Yeah, I agree. I think from their offseason moves, they've done everything they can to get better and improve. And they've brought back a significant amount of the same players, same coaching staff, everything. So I think their biggest problem right now in this moment is their receiver core, because they have just been wiped out with injuries over training camp over the summer. Even Brandon Ayuk, I don't know if I say his last name right every time I say it, but Ayuk, he tweaked a hamstring a couple weeks ago, their first round pick. He was going to have a lot of responsibility now that Debo was hurt and Jalen Hurd was hurt. So I don't think he practiced yesterday. So it's going to be interesting to see early in this season, as they're kind of trying to get back from those receiver injuries, what their offense is going to look like without those guys, because that's going to be, they just were totally wiped at that position. So I think that's going to be their biggest, most pressing hurdle of this moment. But I think you're right. Like, the Super Bowl hangover is definitely real. I just think, Kyle Shanahan is a really talented coach, and John Lynch and him are in such close lockstep that they've done a really good job this offseason of trying to build on what they had. And their practice squad, this is just a random note, but their practice squad is really interesting. If you look at the names on their practice squad, they have Kevin White, who was the first round receiver for the Bears, who was the bust. Yeah. They have Jonathan Cyprien, the safety, who I think was a second round pick and was a starter for several years. And then the third one was, oh my gosh, let me look it up. I'm blanking. Dion Jordan, who was like the third overall pick in 2013. Yeah. So it's just crazy. They have like a stacked kind of like bust practice squad going on.
You'll sign Mohamed Sanu as well, Will.
Oh yeah, undoubtedly.
Like, nailed
They'll
it.
do
I think
far
they
better
do
than the
amazing.
Patriots as well.
the Debo thing is really interesting, Will. I don't know what you think about it as a 49er fan, but it feels like he's really being rushed back, potentially at the risk of missing significant time. You know, it almost feels like you want to ease your way into the season and don't try and rush him back, you know, because maybe you miss 2 or 3 games, but he's healthy, or he comes back, he gets hurt and he misses 9, 10, 11, 12 games, especially at a time when Brandon Ayuk's trying to get his feet under him. That to me is a really interesting decision that they've clearly made.
Speaking to a couple of the beat reporters around the team and speaking to a couple of people around the team as well, talk of this doctors kind of summit that they're bringing together to try and see if they can get him past. He was stupidly key to what they did last year because of how good his blocking was downfield as a receiver, and Wes Welker and the guys there did a phenomenal job of training up those guys to do that. Emmanuel Sanders' blocking was ridiculous compared with any other time we've seen in his career. But if they're not going to get that, they've still got Kittle, they've still got Juszczyk, they've still got a lot of exciting players there. But yeah, I think that I would, if it was me, I'd say take it easy and have him ready to go properly in week 4 rather than trying to push him back now. And I think that we've not made enough of DeForest Buckner leaving. But look at that, we've run out of time, so let's move on. And
the final thing I'd say, Will, and without wanting to take you back there, is just remember how our takeaway that night was. It's not that they lost, it's that they let it slip through their fingers. And I think that is what's hard to get over. And that's what Atlanta had. And they've never been the same since. And that's what would worry me.
Right. After we discussed these kind of 4 teams, we said we were going to get a trendy pick out there as well. And we had a few to pick between. But Kalyn's done a really nice piece, in particular on one of those teams we had out there, and Drew Lock. And I will say straight out, Kalyn, I am not a Drew Lock doubter, because I'm not going to say that. Like, I just feel like people are getting very excited for what is a small sample size going into a season where there hasn't been a lot of, you know, preseason reps, practice reps and everything. And yet in Denver, his praises are getting sung like he's the second coming of John Elway. The people you spoke to, that certainly seems to be the way they were talking about him.
There's definitely too much hype. I will admit that, and I will agree with that. And it's hard when you do like a profile or a feature on a player not to kind of buy into that hype, because most people that you're talking to are really high on the player and telling you great things about them. So I had to sort of walk it back and be like, all right, to see what's going on here. But I think Von Miller sort of said it best. Like, he really, really praised Drew Lock. And I thought it was funny because if you just Google like Von Miller and just look at things he said in the past about Broncos quarterbacks, he said Peyton Manning and Trevor Siemian were very similar. So you had to really take Von's comments with like a huge grain of salt, because he is a fan of everybody. But at the end of our conversation, he was like, listen, if Drew is our franchise, he's definitely our franchise quarterback. And he said, if I'm wrong, then I just don't know anything about franchise quarterbacks. And I think that's sort of the feeling in Denver right now. Like John Elway, I asked him the same question and he didn't say that. He was like, no, I'll just go back to the drawing board. You know, like he was like, nah, like I'm not going to have my evaluation process shaken or anything like that. But I think the feeling is really high around Drew. And it's like, if this isn't it, I mean, what is? Elway kind of has to like totally reshape, because he keeps looking for that tall quarterback who reminds him of himself. So it's like, if Drew isn't the guy for them, then they are really going to have to go back and sort of start over and kind of come up with maybe a whole new vision of what they need at quarterback. But I think what I learned from my reporting is, you know, they have been searching for somebody who has those intangibles, that it factor, the leadership quality, somebody who can make everybody better around them. And even though Drew played very, not great teams last season, he had 5 starts, and really the Texans were the only team that were a good team that he faced, a good defense, a strong playoff team that he faced. So even though he didn't face the best competition, he brought the best out of Noah Fant. Noah Fant came onto the scene more than we had seen him in the season. Even Garrett Bowles, their tackle, who has struggled so much in his career, he played better. He played at a higher level. So I think it's safe to say that Drew has those intangibles more than we've seen in any of the other quarterbacks that Elway has brought in there, from Paxton Lynch to Brock Osweiler to Case Keenum and Joe Flacco in free agency. Drew has proven his leadership qualities, those intangibles are there right now. And I think that's what gives people the most hope in Denver right now.
I think
Denver. Carry on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think Garrett Bowles might be the biggest player in the NFL, or the player in the NFL with the biggest target on his back, as it were, because it almost feels like, the Broncos, you look at the signings of Graham Glasgow, the drafting of KJ Hamler and Jerry Jeudy and Nite Muti, who've all performed really well. I know Cushenberry's going to start. There are real pieces on that team. And, the trade for AJ Boye, which people kind of forget about. You got Justin Simmons, one of the best young defensive players in the NFL. Quite apart from Miller and Chubb and Jarrell Casey that they stole from the Titans. Again, something
astonishing.
Kind of completely forgotten about. But it feels like almost all of it syncs together, obviously, if Drew plays well. But Garrett Bowles feels like the one guy on that entire roster that has to really step up and match his lofty draft position. Because if he is not, if he does not step his game up even further than he did last season, that could be the downfall of that Denver Bronco team that I think, Matt and I were talking about this the other night, I think could go significantly deep into the playoffs.
I think you're sleeping on Dalton Risner, the best young guard in the league last year.
Well, it's a good line,
But, I mean, I think I put the Broncos and the Bucs in the same camp in that they're two teams where you need to look beyond their record last season. If you look at the start of last season, they were involved in that crazy game with, who was it with? Where it was the Bears, wasn't it? They lost to the Bears, I think, in week 2, week 3, in that insane ending. And they had a lot of games like that at the start. Now, Will knows I'm invested in this because I wanted somebody to give Vic Fangio a job for a significant.
You just love an old white coach.
I love old coaches who've paid their dues, which is what
get
Fangio
their shot
is,
finally.
Bruce Arians was, and I really think he can be a good head coach. But they also drafted to me the guy who was the best, certainly the safest player in the draft in Jerry Jeudy, and it's no surprise he's lit up camp, the best route runner I've ever seen in college football. So.
I'm buying in on the Broncos because Kalyn's buying in on the Broncos, and of everyone that's spoken here, she's the convincing one. I'm going to come to one of you each on Buffalo and Arizona, who are the two teams. Matthew, Sean McDermott, I know is someone you're a huge fan of, so why should we be excited for Buffalo?
Because of everything except for Josh Allen, basically. Like
there are 52 unbelievable players, and
it's true.
I think if you put Cam Newton on them, I would pick them to win the Super Bowl. Like
that's the Patriots quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but I'm talking about a quarterback who they could have got for very little money, where I would say that absolutely, they've got a much better chance of winning. All
right, Simon, Arizona.
I mean. This is so
Kalyn won't be aware of this. Here. We are the enemy number one of every Arizona Cardinals fan in the UK.
Why?
Because we all hated the Kliff Kingsbury hire, hated it, and.
But he has such a nice house. Come on.
Yeah, he doesn't.
We didn't know that at the time. I mean,
if we'd have seen his house before he got the job, we'd have been all in.
Yeah.
There were a lot of Twitter spats last year. Anytime the Cardinals looked any good whatsoever, basically, they came for us hard. So are we going to be eating our words this year, Simon?
I think the Kyler Murray progression is obviously really important. Year 2, I thought he looked, pretty good down the stretch in the offense. Obviously, receiving talent is huge, and to be able to bring in a DeAndre Hopkins to complement what they already had is massive. Defensively, they're obviously Budda Baker. We've talked 3 or 4 underrated players, and it was great to see him get paid the other day because I think he's a tremendous player and sort of stepped into that Tyrann Mathieu position. Isaiah Simmons is obviously huge. And then another Chandler Jones flies under sort of almost everybody's radar, but must be he's got to be close to a Hall of Fame career given what he's been able to do over the last 6 seasons. I mean, nobody has more sacks in the last 6 years than Chandler Jones. So I think it's, it might be a year too early. There's a couple of teams where you just think, might be a year too early for them given the hype. But I think certainly, much as it pains me to say it, given how much we hated Kliff Kingsbury, apart from his house, that they seem like they're on the right path.
Right, we're going to rattle through the rest of the league just to make sure we don't ignore everyone. Simon, from our WhatsApp conversations, I won't be asking you about the AFC Central, but instead we'll ask about the AFC South instead. Much like all Dolphins fans living in the early 70s.
If you got to live through, oh my God, you got to live through Bubby Brister and Akili Smith, you get to call it whatever the hell you want. I saw more David Klingler games than you could shake a stick at, so it will all be the end.
So we're going to come to each of you for a division and literally just a line on each of the teams we've not mentioned yet. And I'm going to go in the order that it was sent to me. So, Kalyn, we'll come to you first for the AFC East. Just a couple of teams to write off.
Okay, so Miami, I think at some point this season we are going to see Tua, and I'm excited for that. Hopefully it will be after midseason. Let Fitzpatrick do his thing until he struggles, which is sort of his pattern. I think offensive line is the biggest question here. They have 4 new starters, I believe, rookie left tackle, a rookie right guard, and they don't have any game action together. So how that line meshes together. They had the NFL worst rushing game last season, I believe, 72 yards per game in 2019. So they really need a more physical push from that line. New York Jets, I think offensive balance is going to be tough here for Sam Darnold, who really, is kind of not necessarily an improve it year, but I think a lot is expected of him this year. They don't really have a perimeter playmaker right now. Brashad Perriman has speed, but hasn't necessarily shown that consistent production. Chris Herndon, the tight end, is great over the middle. He'll have a great season, but I'm just not sure if Darnold is going to have enough players to prove his best in this offense. And I think Gase is going to need to really rely on Le'Veon Bell, but considering the drama they've had already this offseason in camp, I don't know how far that will go. And obviously losing CJ Mosley, who opted out at linebacker, and the Jamal Adams trade to Seattle, the defense has a lot of work to do.
That is the kindest way of putting the least talented defense we've seen in a long time. Yeah. And an Adam Gase team struggling with offensive balance, you'd never thought. Right. Simon, the AFC South, please.
Yeah, start with the Texans. It feels like, the beginning of the end of the Bill O'Brien era. This horrendous general managership that he's also sort of overseen. I think there are pretty huge question marks over Deshaun Watson's skill positions and the supporting cast, and especially at receiver when you think of the injury history with Will Fuller and with Brandon Cooks. That to me is they're going to need a big season, I think, from David Johnson if he's to bounce back to that sort of, certainly that rookie form in Arizona. The Colts, I think, if Phil Rivers isn't asked to do too much, I think this is a really good team with a lot of young players. You look at Quentin Nelson, you look at Darius Leonard, you look at some of the guys in the secondary, not particularly well known around the league, but some really good players there. And I think actually Jonathan Taylor and Marlon Mack could combine for they could run all over defenses all season long, so Phil won't have to do too much. The Jaguars, for me, it's literally which coach and general manager will get to draft Trevor Lawrence first overall. That's the only joy for this season. And for the Titans, I suppose, can Ryan Tannehill put together another season like 2019? It's a big question mark, but I think there's 2 players as well I'm really keen to see for the Titans. Jeffrey Simmons, who looks like a future All-Pro defensive tackle, and Darrington Evans, who I think will spell Derrick Henry and should have a big season.
And with that Jadeveon Clowney signing combined with him in the middle, I mean, that's a signing that maybe suddenly go, maybe the Titans might be interesting this year. Matthew, the AFC North, please.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, all eyes on with the Bengals on Joe Burrow. Is he the saviour? The Ohio boy comes home. I mean, that's the storyline that'll loom over the season. But the one that to me will define how the season goes is whether Zach Taylor can coach. I mean, we're talking about people in Kliff Kingsbury who we thought were over-promoted. I think you could say that the same existed for Zach Taylor last season. He looked painfully out of his depth throughout. And yeah, I think Burrow can do a lot of good things. I wonder whether they'll look back and regret not taking the LSU OC, who's now in Carolina, whose name has escaped me. Sorry. Joe Brady, LSU. Yeah, I wonder whether they'll regret not making a run at him. That would have worked so well with Burrow. The Cleveland Browns, again, it's coaching. Have they finally got a coach that can transform the culture there? I don't think we doubt the talent, even more so this year than last year. But that whole operation is about the culture and improving it. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers are the forgotten team in the NFL. And I wonder whether that's a little bit unfair. The funny part is that in the Killer Bees era, they never had a defense. Now they've got a genuinely, potentially elite defense. But is Big Ben still elite? I don't think he is. I don't think he needs to be with a defense that good. But the question is what level is he at? We have absolutely no idea. We saw I actually was at both games he played last season. I was at the Patriots one and the Seahawks one, and he didn't look good even before the injury.
AFC West, Kalyn. Fun division.
Yeah. So Vegas Raiders, still not used to saying that. They have a lot of new faces on defense. And Jonathan Abrams, the rookie safety from last year, he's coming back healthy. So I think they, have lacked a lot of defensive production, especially since trading away Khalil Mack, their defensive leader there. So I think that's going to be a big question this year for them. And especially playing in the AFC West, where they have, unfortunately, the Chiefs, the biggest, highest powered offense in the league. Their defense is really going to have to step up. So I think that's the biggest question for the Raiders. And, does Derek Carr take another step forward in his third season now with John Gruden? And then for the Chargers, I think the question for the Chargers is, what's the plan at quarterback? Tyrod Taylor, I understand why they want to start him. Obviously, I think it's a good plan because Justin Herbert, you don't want to rush him out too soon. So I think that will work for them. It's kind of similar to maybe what we saw the Broncos do last year where Drew Lock started the last 5 games. So I think that'll be good. But I just remember, Tyrod, I think it was a concussion that knocked him out in Cleveland, and that's when Baker Mayfield took over. So I do kind of worry a little bit about Tyrod's injury susceptibility and how soon, if that happens too soon, then what happens to their season. So I'm curious to see what will happen at quarterback and if they can get the production they need from Tyrod Taylor.
Lovely. Right. We're going to speed this up. NFC East, Simon.
I would say a lot of talent for the Cowboys, for a rejuvenated Mike McCarthy. My biggest concern, as it has been throughout this show, is the secondary. You need training bigs, and probably Chidobe Awuzie need to step up. And, without Byron Jones, I think that's a big issue. The Giants is such a young team. Joe Judge might be the right guy, but is Daniel Jones? I think that's the biggest question. The Eagles, can Carson Wentz stay healthy? I think it's the biggest question for them. Huge onus on team speed in the offseason. Jalen Reagor obviously was brought in, but he's injured. Darius Slade, defensively, a really good player. That'll be very important that they can keep that triumvirate healthy. And then Washington, all the talk is about Dwayne Haskins, and rightfully so. But I thought it was interesting, people around him. I spoke to somebody within the Washington organization the other day who said that, you'll be amazed at the strides he's made both on and off the field, just in terms of the way he looks after his body, mentally, in his leadership role. So, I don't foresee a huge amount of wins for Washington, but I do see significantly better quarterback play, which should be important moving forwards.
Couldn't have a better person to work with than Alex Smith either, in terms of leadership, coaching on the field. It's ideal person to be working alongside him. Go back to Matt for the West.
Me for the West. We've obviously chatted about both the Cardinals and the 49ers. So the Rams, I just wonder how, it seems weird to say, but as the window closed on this McVay, Jared Goff era, not McVay, who I'm sure will be there for a long time, but I'm not convinced they can win with Jared Goff at quarterback. And that is not hindsight, as anybody who listens to this show knows. I was very clear in saying that.
We all know.
So, and then obviously, what does the defense look like without Wade Phillips as well? I mean, that was one of the more interesting coaching moves. And then the Seahawks, as ever, excited about Russell Wilson. I would love him to be supported, and it would be great to see. He was supported brilliantly at the start of his career. He hasn't been in the last 5 years. They've still got the worst offensive coordinator in the NFL, and that still worries me. I think the ceiling for the Seahawks is what the last 2 years have been, until they change certainly their offensive coordinator and generally the talent level around Wilson.
Kalyn, our campaign for more surrounding talent for Russell Wilson is something that will run and run and run through seasons, through years of our relationship together on this podcast. Until the day he hangs it up.
I want him to be MVP at some point.
Yeah, another travesty that he's never won MVP. Should have won last year.
He's never had an MVP
vote.
Not even vote. Yeah,
not a single vote. He is more loved here on this show, in this magazine, on this podcast, than he is at home by his wife and kid.
To be clear, he's more loved by 2/3 of the rest of the show. What did he keep calling himself, Mr.?
I mean, it doesn't matter. He can call himself whatever he likes, mate.
Oh, what is it?
That video,
Unlimited,
Mr. Unlimited.
Yeah.
How can you not hate that man? Kalyn, the NFC North.
Okay, so Packers, what did they do to address a needy receiver position group? Absolutely nothing. That's all I have to say.
They drafted a quarterback in the first round, obviously.
And a running
Right.
back in the second round who's third on the depth chart.
So that's all I have to say. We can move on. Detroit, Matt Patricia has to win this year. That's it. I mean, he's done. If he can't win games, especially improve a defense, he's a defensive coordinator. He's a defensive-minded head coach, and his defense is so bad that nobody even noticed that Matt Stafford is playing at an MVP level. So, I mean, Matt Stafford's going to be great again. Give him a defense to back it up. That's what the Lions need to do. Vikings have a lot of new players on defense, so I think the question is, can they match that level? They've set such a high standard on defense so consistently. They've ranked in the top 10 in defensive efficiency in each of the past 5 seasons. So they have a super young cornerback group, Simon, so that might concern you with your need for a secondary to be really strong. But they're going to have to rely on some rookies to contribute at cornerback after losing pretty much all of their starting cornerbacks, their veterans from past years in free agency this season. So that's going to be a little bit different for Mike Zimmer. He doesn't typically tend to play rookie cornerbacks. So I think that's their question. And then the Bears, I mean, why are you starting Mitch Trubisky? I have no clue. That bothered me so much. Everything they did with that quarterback competition just disturbed me on so many levels because I just don't know why you wouldn't take a flyer on Cam Newton. If your intention was to start Mitch Trubisky and give him one more shot, which clearly it was because you didn't sign anybody who was obviously more talented than him. If that was always your intention, then why would you not take a flyer on Cam Newton, who was cheaper, much cheaper than Nick Foles? You didn't have to trade for him like you did with Nick Foles. You traded a 4th-round pick and you're not even starting him. He's like the most expensive backup ever.
But he knew the system, so
right.
What was the? You live in Chicago, Kalyn. What's the reaction been in the
I think
sports
people are
radio?
I think people are just like, why? I mean, I don't know if it was necessarily a surprise. I think a lot of people kind of saw them going that way because it just seems to me it just seems like a pride thing, like almost like they're too proud to admit that it's not working. But he's started 42 games. I don't know what else you need to see. 42 games, that's so much experience to judge what he is. So I think it's crazy, but I think the only silver lining here is that Nick Foles is really good off the bench, as we know. Yeah. That's where he shines. So maybe that's the strategy here, and they won't admit it. Like, they want Foles to come off and save the season. Also, I think I could see, like, Trubisky, I could see the reason they start Trubisky is so, like, if there is any shred of anything left in him, if you demote him to backup, confidence has always been his issue. If you ask anybody about him, they're going to point to like his lack of leadership and confidence and like the it factor that I was talking about with Drew Lock. So I think like if you devoted him to backup, there's a very good chance like he's just never going to regain his confidence. So I guess maybe that's what they were doing there.
Right. By the way, we referenced one of your former colleagues previously. One of the finest things that another of your former colleagues, Connor Orr, has given to the world is the nickname Bortles North for
yes.
for Mitch Trubisky, because you see how they've handled that situation, and it is almost identical at this point.
It really is.
We've gone an hour and we said we were going to do a tight 45. So I question you lot whether we want to do our predictions or not. Maybe we should just fire them out relatively quick fire just so we can be held with our feet to the fire at the end of the season.
We also need to cover the NFC South, Will.
Oh, God.
for the fans of the Saints, Panthers, Falcons, and Buccaneers, not the Buccaneers, but they're just sitting there like, what are these 4 idiots going on about?
We talked about the Bucs for like 10 minutes, and they might finish last in that division. So, Simon Clancy.
Saints, so much talent everywhere, but actually the biggest question mark is over the biggest name, Drew Brees, and can that arm hold up? And it looked like it fell off a cliff back end of last year. Panthers love Matt Rule. They're very young. Kind of flip side to the Saints. I think there'll be some young players. Dante Jackson in the secondary. Derek Brown, I think, has had a tremendous camp and looks every inch the top 10 player that he patently was in the draft. And the Falcons, which Falcons team is going to show up? I think it's either the last hurrah for head coach and general manager, or it's the team that went 1-7 over the first 8 weeks, or it's the team that went 6-2 over the last 8 weeks. Who knows which of those two Falcons teams will show up? But it's shit or bust for Dan Quinn and Thomas Dimitroff.
Right. Now we're going to do the predictions, and we're going to go relatively quick fire on them, and we'll go backwards up the list, starting off with everyone's first overall pick. So after 3, 1, 2, 3, Jaguars. Let's move on. Is anyone picking anyone other than the Jags?
I would pick the Panthers, but I love Matt Rule. It'll just be a bump in the road at the start.
I might say Jets.
Yeah, I mean they're the 3. I think
If it's the Jets and the Panthers, it throws up a very interesting, because
Trevor Lawrence.
Bridgewater and Sam Darnold. It's a very interesting decision then about what you do over, whether they take Penei Sewell or just trade down and take a massive stockpile of picks for an absolutely sensational college quarterback.
We already know Kalyn's coach of the year. I feel like we might already know Matthew's coach of the year as well, based off that conversation, unless he wants to throw someone else out there now.
Bill Belichick.
Yeah, fine. Simon?
Vic Fangio.
Okay. I joked about it earlier, but I'm legitimately splitting between Sean McDermott and Brian Flores, whoever actually wins the AFC East in the place of the New England Patriots.
It won't be Miami, so go with McDermott.
All right, Sean McDermott it is then. He's my coach of the year. Rookie of the year. Now, we've not split this offense and defense, so feel free to do so. Simon?
Clyde Edwards-Hilaire or Antonio Gibson on offense and Derek Brown on defense.
Kalyn?
I'm going to go with Joe Burrow, offense, and then Chase Young or Jeff Okudah for defense.
Matthew?
Jerry Jeudy and Chase Young.
Oh, right. I am going to go Joe Burrow and Chase Young and be really boring and copy Kalyn, but I think that's going to be the most sensible way to go about this throughout the rest of this show. I'm just going to move it on to MVP.
Lamar Jackson.
Okay, Kalyn.
I'm going to go Russell Wilson.
Yeah, come on, you can come again.
Russell Wilson.
See you later. Matthew?
Russell Wilson, definitely.
Mr. Unlimited. I'm going to pick Patrick Mahomes and be boring. There we go. Because I think he'll be the best player in the regular season. However, Super Bowl picks, I am going to take the Baltimore Ravens to beat the San Francisco 49ers in Tampa Bay in February, and I don't care what you think about it. Consistency and coaching will be the reason that they get there, and then the 49ers will blow it for the same reasons that the Ravens will win it. Consistency and coaching. Matthew?
I'm going to pick the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Against the Patriots.
New England Patriots.
Oh, man.
That would be your
New
victory.
England. The Baltimore Ravens. But how good would it be? Buccaneers.
No, it would be terrible.
Amazing.
It would be the worst thing that's ever happened to the sport.
I'll pick them over the Ravens.
Kalyn?
I'm torn. Definitely Chiefs. Either Chiefs, Seahawks, or Chiefs, Bucks. And then I think the Chiefs will win. Either way.
Really this high on the Bucks. This is astonishing. Simon?
Baltimore, New Orleans.
Oh, are you picking Baltimore over New Orleans?
Yes.
I think New Orleans have been the losing Super Bowl finalist in predictions on this show every year for the last 7 years or so. So it's a perfect way to round us off. We did do a little over an hour. We promise it will be a bit tighter in other weeks, but there was a lot to cover because we're going into week 1. Thursday night football, Chiefs, Texans. We'll be, of course, doing plenty of stuff across social media at Gridiron or at UK Gridiron on Instagram. You can subscribe to the magazine as well. Issue 55 of Gridiron is out now, featuring what a surprise, an in-depth look at Tom Brady's move to the suddenly relevant Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But you will get... you do
I'll just say, it's the best headline for a magazine we've ever had. Brady in red. Superb.
Oh,
Oh, that's good. I like that.
It's not Kate. Don't encourage it. Don't encourage it.
I like it.
But you'll hear from Bruce Arians, Brian Baldinger, Scott Pioli, Simon Clancy himself. I, Mike Carson, will be looking at the best head coaches. And you can subscribe now, £2.29 a month from as little as grabbing an issue for every month of the season right through to and including the draft with all your favourite UK names as well. Jeff Reinbold, Rob Ryan, Pro Football Focus guys are involved. And the annual's out as well, edited by Neil Reynolds, 140-page football Bible ready for you to start the new campaign. Kalyn, are you going to come back after this experience?
I'll think about it.
That's about the best response I've ever had to that question. So I'm feeling pretty good about myself. Simon, Matthew, wonderful work as always. Hit us up on social. Thank you so much for listening and watching. This has been The Gridiron Show.